Now I'm very pleased to be able to introduce to you our presenter for today's training, Matt Skinner. Matt has his MBA, you can see on the slide there, and he's got two other credentials. I wasn't familiar with either one, but he did give me some explanation. The CPE-SC is the Certified Professional in Erosion and Sediment Control, and the CESCL is Certified Erosion and Soil Control Lead. Matt has over 20 years of experience with erosion control, site remediation, and geosynthetics. His consulting design work has been applied at hundreds of Superfund sites, at mining reclamations, landfills, and reservoirs. He also works to develop innovative water management solutions for site runoff and overland flow challenges frequently faced in high rain areas. And we sure have had some of those throughout Texas this year. Matt is a frequent presenter at industry events and conducts field training for contractors on a regular basis. His MBA is from Baylor, and as he mentioned, he has the two certifications. He effectively combines his business knowledge with his years of field experience to find the most impactful and cost-sensitive solution to the environmental issues that he's dealing with. And now I invite Matt to make his presentation, Alternative to Hard Armor. Matt?
Thanks very much, Bob. Appreciate that. And hello, everyone. Thank you all for attending today. Appreciate you taking the time to join in. As mentioned, if you have questions, you can certainly type those up. We will address those at the end. I'm also not against tackling some of those questions throughout the presentation as well. So Bob and Mike, feel free to draw my attention to any questions that might have popped up as we go along. We can just tackle those anytime. So appreciate that, everyone. So as we move on here, let me start off by giving you just a little bit of information here about Profile Products and who we are. We've been doing this for over 50 years, focused on revegetation, erosion control. At that time, we've certainly been recognized quite a lot for our innovations, our recycling and upcycling processes. We really take this seriously. Our guiding philosophy as a company is the best form of erosion control is natural vegetation. So that's what we're always striving toward. Every bit of design guidance that we offer, every product that we produce, everything that we do is centered around that ultimate concept. We want lasting, healthy, sustained vegetation. You can get something to grow if you throw enough fertilizer on it for maybe 2 or 3 months. You know, I think we've all seen that. The trouble is when you move into that 6 month, a year, 2 years down the line, is that project really healthy? Are things really growing in the way that the owners want? Are you really getting the results that everyone truly is after? And too often the answer to that question is no. And that's what we really tend to focus on then, is how do we get that great initial growth, of course, so everyone can get released from that project site. But ultimately, how do we make it last indefinitely and really change the actual health and capability of that site? So through these awards and recognitions, we simply highlight these to say that we really believe that we have figured this out. We have some fantastic systems and solutions that really are going to help yield the results that everyone's seeking. Most of us, you've dealt with projects where everything went well for the most part, but still you get down to the end of this project, and by the time you reach the point of a job where you are working on the stabilization, the revegetation, the erosion control right toward the tail end of these projects, so often the money has run thin. There's been already a lot of challenges and unforeseen problems that have occurred on that job site that have taken away money. And we just see a lot of shortcuts taken. Often things are just overlooked at the end of a project, and the vegetation and the erosion control just end up suffering. And we don't end up with the growth that is needed to get that sign off, to get that notice of termination. Everybody starts pointing fingers and blaming each other, and the change orders start to fly around. But again, there's no money left at the end of that job. So that creates all these problems. So we really want to focus on proper design, really getting the right materials, the right solutions specified at the beginning of the job, so we just don't run into those types of problems as we move on through the project and reach that end phase where we're really trying to button things up and just get out of there. So the focus
Matt, you seem to be frozen up. I don't know if you're hearing me.
Screen back on.
That's where we were.
Okay. All right. So as I was saying, we're back to just middle school biology. How do we get this nutrient cycling process rolling again? That's what we focus on, again, trying to get that health, the actual microbiology moving effectively in that soil. We really focus on this because we understand this is where things break down. This is where problems begin on a project site, is we're out there trying to revegetate these zones that just really aren't suitable for sustaining vegetation. We dig a deep detention pond, or we dig out a drainage channel, and we start exposing these soil layers that haven't seen the light of day in hundreds, thousands of years potentially, and there really is no life in those soils. There's really nothing there to support that lasting vegetation growth that we're seeking. So what we do as a company is we offer free soil testing. Been doing that for about 14 years now. We do somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000, 2,500 soil tests a year typically. And these soil tests, it gives us that foundational understanding of what's wrong with the soil, what problems do we need to prepare for and come up with a solution for that will help us ensure that we do achieve the establishment and regrowth that we're seeking at the end of these projects. So we have this website, it's Profile PS3. This website has a whole lot of resources for you. It has design tools and calculators to help with things like Russell equations, Manning's N calculations, various slope and channel design things. Also for project estimating, there are calculators for that as well. But it's where we also process our soil tests. So again, this is a free service available to contractors, engineers, landscape architects, anyone who might have use of this. If you've done soil testing in the past, it was probably ran through a local university or extension office. They do a great job. They just tend to be rather slow and a little bit expensive. So we process these soil tests in less than 72 hours. Once our lab receives a sample, we've got results back in 3 days. So we don't delay the project, we get results quickly, and it gives us that foundational understanding of what problems we might experience. And again, we can anticipate those challenges, and we're not left with a bunch of surprises at the end of a project when things just won't grow. So I won't spend too much more time on that. Just wanted to make you aware that the free soil testing is available, and it's something we could talk more about offline if anyone was interested in learning more about that service. So as we've been doing this soil testing for a long time, we've come to understand, problems and issues that are commonly faced on job sites. Flow rates are most certainly a problem that we see is often overlooked. Too frequently, we see things like erosion control blankets and standard levels of hydromulch utilized for erosion control in areas that are experiencing flows that are just too high. And the standard hydromulches and erosion control blankets just can't tolerate the flow rates that they're often exposed to. But we get those failures, we get rilling, we get slope failures, washouts, and all these various problems. So really understanding the right solution for those flows, whether they are high sheet flows or concentrated channelized flows, really preparing and designing effectively is a key element. I live in Houston myself. I understand what it's like to have some very high flow events. And we really need to be certain that we are anticipating those, designing accordingly to those, and specifying solutions that are truly going to tolerate those flow rates and tolerate those over and over and over again. We certainly recognize that we're moving into just a phase within the climate that we're seeing more and more of these high flow events on an annual basis. So we really have to step up that design game and really be prepared and anticipate what we're going to be subjecting these sites to. So that's where this green armor system comes in. It is an alternative to your typical hard armor, rock and concrete based solutions. Things like articulated block, Fleximat, just concrete, various levels of riprap. This is something that will tolerate the same types of flow rates and shear forces, but actually is engineered and designed to vegetate. So we can have a green solution, something that is much more aesthetically pleasing, yet fully functional. It can be mowed and maintained with ease, but it gives us that look that so often is going to be preferred, particularly as we're looking at various residential, commercial developments where these drainage channels are very visible. They got a lot of eyes on them, and we just don't want to see all that rock and concrete everywhere. Not to mention some of the safety concerns that come up with rock-based solutions. And then I think far too often we see these concrete solutions, they really just become graffiti murals. That's basically what turns into those. So we can just take away all of those various problems and hassles through something such as this green armor system. Just to give you a quick breakdown, flow tolerances on this product are going to be 30 feet per second and 24 pounds of shear at our high level. So we can really handle some pretty severe flow scenarios while, again, simultaneously giving you that green vegetated option. We've certainly seen bad examples of hard armor in the past, used what was maybe the best available solution at that point in time, but we've certainly come a long way. We've made a lot of improvements. Now we can have this sort of solution. We're able to achieve these vegetated zones that are able to actually capture TSS. We're able to provide that aesthetic look, and again, that safety factor as well, versus what you see in this image, the left being our green solution, and then the right being a more typical rock concrete type based answer. Certainly, we can see some benefit here to this basic design just in this image. This type of design, very common. Again, we see these all the time. Of course, we look at a situation like this and we understand, well, the water, it's probably not going to cooperate real well, and it's just not going to make a 90-degree turn when we tell it to, just because there happens to be a pilot channel there. Obviously, that's why the riprap is there, to handle some of that overflow. But far too often we see these types of solutions, they really end up failing. The water still undermines the riprap subsides, gets washed away. They just aren't a real lasting solution. They require a lot of maintenance, repositioning the riprap, adding additional riprap, repairing the fabric underneath the riprap as it degrades and tears over time. We look at these projects from a longer term maintenance perspective, and they really become frustrating for those who are handling that maintenance long term. If we can turn this into a vegetated solution, the maintenance is nothing more than mowing, which is going to be a standard practice in other areas on these sites anyway. We're just adding a little more mowing zone. That's really about all we're proposing here. Of course, we see this as well. Pilot channels that fail, they get undermined, they exceed their bounds. Then we have to come back in with either more concrete or put riprap along the edges of the pilot channels. That's a common solution we see. Still, again, not really the lasting, sustained revegetation that we are always striving toward. Erosion blankets, again, being subjected to flows that they're just not really designed to. It's designed to handle. So we get that undermining, we get those rills that form underneath the blankets. They come unpinned, as we see here, roll up against that flow. You know, it's just, again, making the right choice, getting the right solution based on those flow rates is so critical. So we'll break down here a little more of how this really works. What we do on the Green Armor system is it's a two-part system. We start with a specialized TRM. It is a very open weave design. If you're familiar with a standard turf reinforcement mat, something like Pyramat, Landlock, some of these other name brands you've probably heard of, they do an extremely good job of erosion control. But they're also very tightly woven, and it is challenging for the vegetation to punch through that tight weave and actually get established. So our hope, again, is we want vegetation to really be the erosion control measure. So we want to enable that vegetation to reestablish as quickly as possible. So we use this very open design TRM. Plenty of space for vegetation to penetrate through, as well as plenty of space for airflow, UV exposure, everything we need for that healthy vegetation. And we offer 4 different versions of that TRM, depending on the flow and shear forces that are expected to be experienced in that drainage zone. So that gives us a little more fine tuning there for the solution, as well as helps us manage the overall price on the project. So you see the image there on the left. That is, again, that open weave design we talk about. Plenty of space there for vegetation to establish. Roughly about ½ an inch thick is kind of the average size on that. The image that you see on the right is our highest performing version. So on that, you see that we add a reinforcing grid. That's more in situations where we're going to be experiencing traffic flow over the top, actual vehicles moving over the top of that zone on a regular basis. A simple example is we use it very commonly on golf courses through cart paths and cart areas where they're going to be driving all day long frequently with dozens, if not hundreds, of golf carts on a daily basis passing over a zone. Then still, again, it lets us revegetate, have a grassy solution, but it can be additionally stabilized there to handle those loads and those repeated tire loads. So we start with that TRM, as I said, and then the second part of that system is that we infill that TRM with a very specialized, high-performing erosion control hydromulch called Flexterra. Now, that's been around for almost 20 years now. A lot of you are probably familiar with it. You've probably used it before on many projects. Engineered to really handle some high-flow situations all by itself. What you see here on that image is we start with standard wood mulch fibers, just like any type of hydromulch. That's represented by those green fibers you see running in that image. And then we add a reinforcing fiber, a crimped reinforcing fiber. That is represented by the yellow angular images there. They wrap, they interlock with those wood fibers and dramatically increase the internal strength of the mulch as well as its interface friction strength. And then we add specialized polymers and tackifiers that are hydrophilic. So that product actually holds 17 times its weight in water. So, to put that more simply, it means we're putting 11,000 gallons of water out per acre, and the water is held in the mulch matrix and then slowly released back out over the next 2 to 4 weeks. And every time it gets rained on again, it once again captures that water and holds that over time. So we're really helping to sustain the vegetation long term through that moisture retention process. The seed is incorporated inside the hydromulch. So as we spray that Flexterra into the TRM, the seed then begins to germinate right inside of that three-dimensional matrix of the TRM. So there's an image there of how that looks with the Flexterra sprayed inside the TRM. And then that germination allows the root structure to form inside the TRM. So what we're doing here that's very different from any other approach is we're giving the root zone a reinforcement point to hold on to against those high flow situations. With a typical TRM, you put the seed down first, then you put the TRM over the top, and the seed just has to punch up through the TRM. The roots themselves are only holding on to the soil as naturally they would. And those sprigs that come up through the TRM are very prone to being sheared off during a high flow situation. And then more sprigs, more growth has to continue to penetrate through that TRM over time. It just becomes challenging to revegetate. Here again, we have that open weave design that really encourages the vegetation establishment. The root structure then is reinforced. As subsequent generations of vegetation begin to establish, they'll continue to lock into that TRM for reinforcement, and then they can tolerate those high flows with ease. The roots then obviously penetrate deeper into the soil as well for their nutrient needs, and that locks the TRM in place, just locks it right down tight to that subgrade. And that allows us to mow and maintain it with ease, and we don't have a problem of what we call tenting, where something like an erosion control blanket can often get lifted up by vegetation and then it gets caught in the mower blades. We don't have those problems. The vegetation growth locks it down to the subgrade, keeps it there, and allows that long-term maintenance to occur with no challenges. So here's an image here, that upper right, where you see the infilling process occurring. Just out there again, a typical hydromulch operator will infill that with the Flexterra, infill that TRM. If there happen to be void spaces, maybe the subgrade is not totally perfect and smooth the way that we would like it, that's okay, because that hydromulch is going to penetrate through the TRM, fill those void spaces, and still continue to stabilize and protect that slope. It'll still prevent water from getting underneath and scouring, still give us some really fantastic results, unique part of that application process there. So a couple of examples here, some case studies, just to give you some idea of how we apply this, where we typically are going to receive the benefit from these materials. Obviously here we have this drainage zone that's going to experience some concentrated downhill flow. So certainly this needed to be reinforced. We would be concerned in a case like this with basic erosion blankets. They would get lifted up and rolled down the hill pretty easily during a high event. So here we're able to utilize this higher performing green armor solution. You see the image in the upper right of the actual filling process occurring. It's pretty rapid. This example here, we've got the large truck that's just able to drive slowly down the side there and just blast everything in and infill it again. Seed, fertilizer, everything's incorporated in one application. So it's a very speedy process. And then we have that lower left image is about 2 months after installation. Yeah, we're pretty happy with those results. And again, easily mowed when it needs to be, a few times a year, and the maintenance is pretty simple. This gives you a better idea. This is a 1-year forensic sample that we took on site. We're able to see here some pretty significant establishment through that TRM. We see a lot of growth above the TRM as well, though. That's one thing I'll note is over time, as we do experience those flow rates, we're capturing sediment. And that sediment layer will build up over time above that TRM. It eventually just pretty well disappears. You don't know it's there, but it continues to provide that reinforcement point, that anchoring point for the vegetation over an extended period of time. Another image there, we see those, again, those tightly woven TRMs. That's the example on the right. They're great for erosion control, but they do struggle to vegetate because of how tightly woven the design is. So we've opted for this more open design that really encourages the vegetation growth, again, because ultimately we want the vegetation to be what's really doing the work, doing the heavy lifting. So a few other benefits here we'll talk about come from the design side for certain. If we're looking at our ponds as well as our drainage channels, and maybe you're considering riprap as the current solution, well, if we were to utilize that green armor solution instead, we can certainly reduce the amount of excavation that would be needed to maintain the required capacity in that pond or channel. Just that simple idea we see explained here in this top and bottom image. Similarly, as we look at other types of design, we can reduce the right-of-way. Another benefit that could be found within this project. That's something we've done a lot in the Houston area in particular, is reducing the pond sizes and drainage channel sizes, increasing the available land. And we've actually been able to work with various apartment complexes and add additional garage space, additional parking areas, because we were able to reduce the footprint that was needed for the drainage zones. Certainly that's valuable to your clients. They're able to put some actual revenue generating area or property there instead of having that land sucked up with just drainage. You know, we've seen larger footprints be able to be constructed on, various strip malls, or larger storefronts able to be constructed because we can gain a lot of square footage by altering that design on the drainage areas. Again, channel capacity, we can certainly alter and increase where needed. Again, eliminating, whether it be 4 inches thick of concrete or the riprap, in either case, we can reduce that profile and we can improve the design parameters through the use of that green armor solution. A little idea here on some testing. This is standard ASTM testing for these types of erosion control turf reinforcement materials. There's really only one place in the country that can do this type of testing. It's out at Colorado State University. They're able to do these large scale vegetated box testing here that is a standard ASTM protocol. So we have this vegetated box there, as you see, that has been, the standard procedure is 60 days of growing. So you vegetate it, give it 60 days to establish, and then you put it into the testing flume. So that's what we're seeing here. So this test is run at 30 feet per second, 24 pounds of shear on a 30-degree slope. So it's a pretty intense test. And we're able to, again, confidently tell you these tolerance levels that we have from green armor because of these real extensive destructive type tests. The visual there, just a quick video. That is, yeah, this one there. So a few more case studies we'll talk about here. This is a project, local one down in Austin, the new toll road 130 that went in a few years ago. So this detention basin was already in existence. Often the trees back there is where Onion Creek flows, if any of you happen to be familiar with that area. And during a high rain event, Onion Creek would flood out into this basin. That was just normal part of the drainage design. But now we also are adding the additional drainage coming off of 130. And prior to adding that roadway drainage, when Onion Creek would flood out into this basin, it was already causing a lot of damage. The transmission line that you see in the distance in the center, that transmission line had been undermined. The foundation of that transmission line had been undermined by Onion Creek. It had started to actually tilt. They had to come in and jack that up and reinforce it and stabilize that. And so TxDOT saw evidence that there were some challenges here with swirling action that was taking place, as well as rapid drawdown was a common challenge here for this zone. It would fill up with water during those high rain events, but it would draw down extremely quickly. And we understand that creates a lot of challenges. So they opted to reinforce this zone then and really ensure it could handle all that additional drainage and flow. So it came in here with the TRM. You see the process there in filling it with the Flexterra hydromulch, the seed again, all incorporated there. 1 year later, looking pretty good. What happens during high rain events now is this vegetation will just lay down basically under the weight of the water. It will lay flat. As the water then drains, the vegetation is able to stand right back up again because the roots were not torn out. They were stabilized through the use of that TRM, and they're able to maintain that strength and stability. This site actually performed so well that several endangered bird species began nesting in this zone. And 2 years after this project, it was designated as a protected wildlife sanctuary. TxDOT was actually not happy about that because that gave them all sorts of new restrictions when it came to maintenance and such. But we look at it as a positive. It was a very good environmental impact. There are now bird watching stands that some local groups have constructed out through here, and it's just become a really popular zone to go and do bird observations. But it's survived now. This has been 6 years ago that this project was put in place. We've certainly seen a lot of high rain events, a lot of washouts and flooding, but this zone continues to perform flawlessly. Another example here, this is a project up in Tennessee, obviously a drainage channel, a lot of flow, a lot of curves, some challenges here. You see the bridge. That's one thing I'll point out to start with is underneath the bridge, we are still utilizing riprap. Again, we want this to vegetate. So if we're looking at an area that is not going to receive any UV, then it's probably not going to vegetate. So we would not recommend utilizing green armor in an area that will be shaded permanently and not get that UV exposure that we're looking for. So we incorporated riprap underneath the bridge. We put the TRM in these other zones. Then we see here about 2 months later, looking pretty good. In fact, this performs so well that right away, the engineer at first you see had left that little riprap zone on the left at the bend. He was a little concerned that we might need some added reinforcement in that area. But within 6 months, we had torn out that riprap and replaced the whole thing with the green armor. So that entire sloped area was green and vegetated, not only just that area under the bridge again left as riprap because of that limited UV exposure. This is a mining project. Got this diversion channel coming down here the slope, pretty high flow. This is in Western Washington area, so a lot of water, a lot of flow. If you know out there, Seattle, Portland, that type of zone. So we really needed to make sure this was well vegetated and reinforced to handle the types of rains and those consistent rain events out there. You see the lower photo, 3 weeks, looking pretty good. Then Mother Nature just kind of kicked in and all the native species started to really grow in and migrate through that zone. That was expected. We wanted to see that natural progression occur, but we're still maintaining that drainage zone. It still exists. We can still have that path for the water flow, but you'll never know really that the reinforcement is there, but it is giving us that strength we need against those high flows. A nice park project here. That image, you can see the creek that is flowing along the perimeter of this park. Creek continues to overflow its bounds, encroaching on the park zone, on some walking and biking trails there. Just continues to have some challenges experienced in that area. So coming in here, again, process just like any other TRM. We install it with anchors and anchor trenches and soil staples, typical TRM installation, nothing special there. And then we infill it with, again, that Flexterra hydromulch. What's also unique about this project, you see is we incorporated saplings. So the design of this TRM allows us to actually cut holes in it if we want. We can cut holes and put in saplings, shrubs. If you start cutting holes in other TRM systems, they are a mono weave design. So essentially you end up with that cartoon effect where you pull a string on a sweater and the whole sweater comes unraveled. Well, that happens with those other TRMs. If you cut a hole in them, you've now weakened the entire system and the whole thing can come unraveled. But our design does not rely on that single weave system. So we can cut holes in it. We can put these saplings and shrubs and forbs and such in there if we want that to be part of the design. Also, if we want that zone to go through a natural progression where woody vegetation will eventually take hold, that's totally fine as well. As those larger trees and woody vegetation begin to grow, that TRM will naturally just tear very gently around the trunk of that growth over time, still continue to provide protection for all the surrounding zone, but it will allow that larger growth to come in given enough time. So here we see that process. Just continued installation shots here from kind of before and after images there of getting the TRM installed. The image on the left now, we see the green of the hydromulch has been applied. And then about two and a half weeks later, on the image on the right, we see some grassy growth beginning to come in. And then 2 full months later now, we have completely stabilized and secured that slope. The grassy vegetation has taken hold. We got those shrubs and saplings that were planted that'll grow in more later. And you see that walking trail, how close it was there to the shoreline, being able to protect and stabilize that trail, key element of this project. We see this all the time, right? These pilot channels that exceed their bounds. So again, the typical process here would be riprap. Let's just throw more riprap along the edge. Sure, that works temporarily. But we see these pilot channels undermine the riprap constantly, push the riprap downstream during the high flow. It's just really not the best solution. So instead, what we came in here with was taking that TRM in 4-foot strips and applying it to either side of this pilot channel. And then again, revegetating that with the Flexterra hydromulch. 2 months later, looking pretty nice. And here we're able to easily mow and maintain that. The mowers can just drop their wheels right in the pilot channel and drive right along the edge. No special requirements there. And then another Houston project here. We've got this detention basin going right here along the roadway out to kind of near the intersection of 59 and 610, south side of town there, south of Galleria. So, you can see how close the roadway is. We really need to stabilize this slope. So we are not having any loss of slope there and compromising the roadside. So here we're expecting a lot of flow coming off all that impervious pavement area, as well as a lot of flow that will be coming off of this commercial development that's going in place. So utilizing that grain armor system here, 2 months later, yeah, we got some extreme stabilization. We have secured those slopes, pretty steep slopes you see. They're barely getting things going on the construction side. And when we have that construction process occurring, we also know there's going to be a lot of sediment, a lot of washout. No problem. That vegetation is going to help us capture that, filter that. And, this was about 18 months ago. This one was finished and just been a fabulous solution ever since there. So last little case study here, I'll flow through another local job down in Houston. So this is the Wortham Center, heavily flooded and damaged during Hurricane Harvey. It took almost a year for them to reopen after Harvey. It's just an extensive restoration process needed. Across the street from the Wortham Center is Bayou Place. It's home to Revention Music Center, a couple restaurants, and it is the main parking area for the Wortham Center. So during Harvey, this is right next to Buffalo Bayou. That's what caused all this flooding. Bayou runs right adjacent to both the parking structure and to Wortham Center. So the video here we see during Harvey, that lower bridge was completely underwater, and the parking garage was flooded up to the third deck. Over 300 cars were lost during Harvey there in that parking garage. Pretty significant damage. We know Buffalo Bayou floods all the time. It's always going to continue to flood. During Harvey, it was so extreme, however, that the slope that you see now up against the parking structure, that slope was totally washed out. The water got underneath the Bayou Place parking structure and carved out a cavern the size of 2 professional basketball courts, 13 feet high. So the entire structure was compromised, structurally fully compromised. So the contractor had to come in here and put supports, thousands of yards of flowable concrete, and restabilize the structure. Once they had restabilized, then we had to come in here and rebuild that slope, and not only rebuild the slope, but stabilize it against future flooding. You know, we knew there would be more flooding, and we know there will be more intense flooding over time. So the green armor solution was chosen as the way to reinforce this slope properly. So the upper photo there, you see the dirt work, getting that all that slope rebuilt right up against the building edge. And then the lower photo is that process again of the TRM is down first. Then we're installing that Flexterra hydromulch in, seed again, everything incorporated. This installation happened right at the very tail end of May of 2019. 2 weeks later, we're into mid-June now of 2019, looking pretty good. You know, getting pretty good Bermuda establishment there after just 2 weeks. But we're also moving into the hottest time of year in Houston, and this is not an irrigated zone. So we were a little worried that if we got a hurricane or a really high rain event, big tropical storm over the summer, this could be subjected to a very high flow event before we had an adequate level of vegetation establishment ready to tolerate that flow. Well, sure enough, less than 90 days after installation, we got hit with Tropical Storm Imelda. So that blew through town, and Bayou flooded for 2 days. This area was underwater. After 2 days, I was able to get in there and actually get some photos and check the site out. Well, we didn't lose a single bit of dirt. I mean, that entire slope was fully, completely secure and stabilized. Fantastic. And since then, this has been underwater another 4 times. You know, it's going to keep happening. That's just the nature of the bayou, but we're not worried. We were able to really stabilize and secure this, and just fantastic results here that anybody can walk on down and take a look at yourselves if you happen to be in the Houston area. So just that recap again, we're offering that solution that is not only functional, but really gives us the green aesthetics that we're often looking for on these projects. We're helping with that sediment capture, that groundwater recharge, and we're actually improving the overall habitat, as we saw, particularly that Austin example. I love that one, that the way we turn that into this protected wildlife zone even. You know, a couple of highlights, just to recap again, also, check out our PS Cubed website, great design tools, and again, soil testing available for you there. So I'm going to wrap up about this point because I want to have some more time for those question and answer, but I will have this up on the screen because I would also appreciate some feedback regarding the presentation. So you see that there is the QR code there. You can scan that with your phone quickly and it will take you to a quick 4-question or 5-question survey. Or you can just type in that short web address, that bit.ly profile 10B address. That'll take you to the same survey. But certainly I'd appreciate just a little bit of feedback as well about what you thought about today's presentation. And by filling out the survey, we do put you in for a monthly drawing for a $50 Amex gift card. So best of luck on that as well. So I'll go ahead and kick it over here to Bob. What do we have in the way of any questions that have come through then?
All right, Mike, we have a question from Jake. He's asking, what is the steepest bank the product can be used on?
We can do absolutely steep faces. We have done steep face type applications through a lot of hill areas like, Colorado, Utah, Idaho, up into the Rockies. The basic question is, can you get a crew on there to anchor it safely? If you can do that, then we can put it there. We've done a lot of these projects in those mountain areas where usually they might do something like a kind of like a chain link or metal kind of netting over the face to try to stop rockfall. But when they would rather vegetate it, certainly that's a better solution. Yeah, we can get up there and the crews might be working off of ropes, but they can get up there and they can anchor it, stabilize it, and then we can spray it from a distance, get the hydromulch in there, and we can get that reestablished and vegetated. So really not a limit on the steepness. It's just going to be about the practicality of installation.
And a question from Ellen. Are there any places in North Texas where this has been used?
Quite a few. I'd probably have to get with you offline to give you a few examples if you wanted to see some actual sites. Now, I guess define North Texas. I mean, how far north are we talking? Like, we go up in the Panhandle kind of area, or are we just talking like north of Dallas? The Dallas area, we got a whole bunch. We start getting out into West Texas. There's probably a less examples out there, but definitely we've done some wind farms, some solar farms out in the West Texas area where we needed additional stabilization. So we've got a few examples that I could get to you offline.
Yes, and I think the question was referring to the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Okay. Yeah, Dallas area, a lot. Definitely, we've got a lot of projects through that zone. So, definitely I can get with you offline and get you some examples there that you could do a little field trip to if you'd like and check those out.
Another question. What do you do when you mentioned under the bridge, you didn't want to put the product in because the grass wouldn't grow? How much, what alternatives are there where you're doing it other than riprap where the grass won't grow?
Yeah, if we have, primarily those UV situations where we're just going to have permanent shade, we're not going to get enough UV to get vegetation to grow, then really it's going to need to be something like riprap or concrete. And then we can assist with some design ideas to make that transition between the riprap or concrete into the green armor system as you move into those UV zones. That's just the one limit I like to point out, is that, we don't want to put it in a place where it's not going to get enough sunlight to get vegetation, because that just defeats the purpose of the product design. Things like Fleximat, if you're familiar with that one, that is a kind of a pyramidal concrete block system that's tied together with a geogrid. I've seen that work extremely well in a lot of situations like that, where there's just not enough UV to grow anything else, but they can do it's an easy installed product. So there's a few different solutions out there that I would expect would perform well, but it's usually going to be something that is rock or concrete for sure.
If anyone else has a question, feel free to enter it in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll get to it. I think it's very interesting. Even in my own neighborhood, there are some storm drains that outlet into kind of a wooded area with very rugged side slopes on the channel, and obviously it continues to erode away. And how does the cost of what you talked about compare to other alternatives?
Yeah, so what I would tell you from a design perspective for budget purposes, again, we have 4 different variations of the TRM that we utilize depending on those exact flow and site conditions. So then the range that I would tell you on budget pricing would be to figure between $15 to $22 a square yard fully installed. That is seed, the hydromulch applied, everything between 15 to 22. Again, just depending on which variation of TRM was chosen for the project. And you should easily see that that is much less than concrete and riprap, about half the price of concrete, and easily 30–40% less than riprap if we're talking anything above 18-inch. And then when you look at things like Pyramat or Landlocked, those other tightly woven TRMs I talked about, equal price. We see that we run pretty equal on price there. The difference, again, just being the more readily available vegetation that we would promote with the green armor option.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions, and sure want to thank you for your presentation, Matt. We sure appreciate